What would you do if the person you trusted most confessed they cheated for years, not out of love, not out of despair, but simply out of boredom? Tonight's story is not just about betrayal. It's about a man who faced the unthinkable and made a choice that would change his life forever. Stay with me because what he discovered will shock you and the ending may inspire you. This is Cheating Stories 7. If you find stories like this meaningful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us keep sharing these unforgettable journeys. Now, let's step into the story. She cheated for 4 years out of boredom. I chose myself. The night Lily left, the house felt tilted, as if a floorboard had given way and only Noah could see the break. She moved through the entry quietly, hurried, an overnight bag brushing her leg. Her eyes were bright and red, the kind that come after holding back tears too long. She said something to Ava that came out as a tremble, half words and air, then looked once toward the stairs as if measuring a goodbye she could not afford. The door closed without a slam. The gentleness made it unreal. By morning she was gone for real. Calls unanswered, texts unread. The family group chat, once full of photos and grocery lists, now showed his messages stacked like postcards never forwarded. Noah kept the breakfast machine running. Toast, eggs, school reminders. He tried to sound like an instruction manual, even tempered, useful. The girls watched him like a weather report they did not trust. Sadie asked where Mom went. Brooke asked why. Ava did not ask anything at all. He called Lily's parents first because that is what you do when you want an explanation that keeps the walls standing. Be patient, they said. She is safe. Give her time. Their voices were soft but heavy, the way people sound when they are reading a script they did not write. He hung up with gratitude in his tone and suspicion in his chest. Their town was 3 hours away on a good day. He plotted the drive against school pickup and after-dinner dishes and decided that, for now, he would stay. Then he decided again an hour later, and then again after that. School drop-off carved the morning into an imitation of normal. He waved at teachers, answered a quick message from his boss, and returned to a house rearranged by absence. Her sweater draped over a chair. A coffee mug in the sink, a faint ring inside like an eclipse. In the closet, gaps where her most used things should have been, but not enough to count as leaving. Her toothbrush still in the cup. Her charger gone. He turned the facts over the way you turn a key that will not catch. They had not fought. That was the strange truth he kept returning to. No slammed doors. No cold wars. The closest thing to conflict in recent months had been a sigh when the dishwasher beeped, or the way she said, "I'm tired," and stared past him, past the table, past the evening. He had read it as routine, as the price of caregiving and commutes. Now every sigh felt like a breadcrumb he had missed. He rifled his memory like a detective, pulling small moments into the light until they looked like evidence. Nights stretched thin. He lay on his side of the bed and stared at hers, a dent in the pillow, a book face down with a ticket stub marking a chapter he would not read. At strange hours, he reached for his phone, typing and deleting messages that tried to make the silence reasonable. "Are you okay? Do you need time? Please." He stopped himself each time, because pleading felt like stepping into a current he could not fight. In the dark, the house made small sounds that read as messages if he let them. The refrigerator hummed, the heater clicked, somewhere a pipe sighed. He listened anyway. The girls adapted in 3 different languages. Sadie leaned into him, asking to be carried up the stairs as if she were little again. Brooke watched him for fractures, then overachieved to brace what she imagined might break. Ava's silence was iron. They had always known their parents did not fight, and so they had believed that meant nothing bad could happen. He gave them honest vagueness. "Mom is with Grandma and Grandpa. She needs some space to think. We are going to be kind and patient." He said it often enough that the words felt like stones smoothed by a river. He called the in-laws again. The same answer. He called Lily's brother and got a shrug he could hear. He called a coworker of hers and learned that Lily had clocked in and left before lunch 3 days ago. Each detail pressed a thumbprint into his chest. He stood at the sink, hands braced on the counter, and tried to picture the moment she decided to go. Did it happen in the car at a red light? In the shower while the house was quiet? Or had the decision been made months ago in a place he could not see, and this was merely the date circled on a private calendar? He thought about driving. He thought about showing up at the in-laws' door and forcing truth into the hallway where it could not hide. Then he thought about the girls asleep upstairs. He imagined waking them to a note and a promise he might break if the drive took too long. He stayed. He folded laundry. He emailed Ava's teacher about a group project. He adjusted the chore chart no one liked. He did each small act as if the right order might restore the larger one. On the third night, he realized what terrified him most was not that Lily had left, but that she had left like this, without the courtesy of a story he could argue with. Silence offered no target. It turned him against himself. And beneath the questions, a colder thought waited, steady as rock. Whatever pulled her away had been building for years. You do not vanish from a marriage in a single night. Cracks spread under paint long before it peels. He looked at the empty side of the bed and saw the first line of a dam begin to show, a seam visible only because the water had already started to press. He set his phone face down and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow he would make lunches, drive to school, return to the same house and the same chair and the same unanswered messages. He would call once more. He would ask the same patient questions in the same patient voice. And as he rehearsed this, he understood something he did not want to know. He was no longer waiting for Lily to answer. He was waiting for the truth to arrive, and he suspected it would not come carrying comfort. Days without contact turned time into a hallway with no doors. Morning became a checklist. Lunches packed, notes signed, drive, wave, return. Every ring of the phone jolted Noah like an alarm that never resolved. He answered numbers he did not recognize. He checked voicemail before the tone finished. Nothing changed. Silence was the only thing reliable. He cooked because cooking still made sense. Heat plus time equaled dinner. He narrated steps out loud as if the girls were toddlers again, and this was a lesson in cause and effect. Olive oil, garlic, pasta water rolling like a storm. Brooke asked if Mom was still with Grandma. Sadie asked if Grandma was sick. Ava ate without speaking, her gaze fixed just left of everyone else. Noah kept his answers soft. She needs some time. She is safe. We are okay. He said each line as if it were a bridge, and for a few minutes it held. Friends texted variations of the same comfort. We are praying. Let us know what you need. His sister left long voice messages that started brave and ended with a tremor. Neighbors dropped off casseroles, then another, until the house smelled like other people's kitchens. He thanked them at the door, then closed it quickly so the girls would not feel stared at. After bedtime, he stood at the sink and realized he had no appetite for the gifts. He ate a spoonful of something cold to honor their effort and slid the dish away. He called Lily's workplace and heard the administrative voice he remembered from holiday parties. She arrived, the woman said, then left before lunch. No details, no emergency contacts used, his number unused. The word before widened inside him like a corridor he could not see down. He filed a wellness check because that is what you do when you need a rule to hold your hand. Officers called back. She is safe. She is with her parents. She does not wish to be contacted for now. They said it kindly, as if kindness could help the words pass. It did not. The assurance felt like a door closing softly in his face. Sleep deserted him, then mocked him. He drifted for 10 minutes at a time and woke with his heart pounding at nothing. The clock's digits multiplied. 12 became 3, became 5. He remembered dances in a high school gym that smelled of lemons and varnish. They had walked the perimeter because neither could dance without laughing. He remembered the drive home from their wedding, her feet bare on the dashboard, her hair still catching light. He remembered rooms where they had promised each other ordinary days. Each memory returned now with a question mark in the corner. Was that the moment something cracked? Was that when the floor began to tilt? He inventoried explanations the way a doctor lists symptoms, a trauma he never knew, a diagnosis unspoken, a mistake she believed unforgivable. He admitted people leave for reasons that are not betrayals, but he was honest enough to feel fear gnawing at each reason until it dissolved. He told himself to wait one more day before driving the 3 hours. He told himself again at dusk. He told himself until the vow became a rhythm louder than sleep. The girls whispered divorce like a spell they did not want to cast. They thought whispering kept words from becoming true. Noah knelt to their height and said, "No, we are not there. We will wait for Mom to explain." He believed the first sentence as he said it. He believed the second because belief was a choice he could still control. When Ava asked what they should prepare for, he told her, tests, soccer practice, the science fair that always arrives sooner than you think. Protect or prepare. He did both badly and tried again the next day. On the fourth evening, he sat in the car after drop-off and did not turn the key. The lot was half empty. A paper tag fluttered on the dashboard from last week's oil change, as if he was still waiting his turn. He wondered how many versions of himself sat in invisible waiting rooms across the city. Men with clean kitchens and steady voices. Men repeating "be patient" into phones that never answered. He thought of the phrase, wellness check, and how strange it was that the word wellness delivered so little comfort. He looked at his hands on the wheel and decided to breathe as the therapist on the phone once told him. In through the nose, hold out through the mouth. Again until the world stopped sharpening at the edges. At home, the walls had learned to hold their breath. He moved through rooms as if they were legal documents. He read what was there. He read what was missing. A charger gone from the nightstand. A coat missing from the hook. A tube of lipstick still in the drawer. Like a witness that never testified. He wanted to call his in-laws and demand a different sentence. Tell me the thing you are not allowed to say. But when he pictured the call, he also pictured his daughters asleep upstairs, and he could not risk turning the night into an argument that would wake them. On the sixth day, the phone rang during dinner and every fork froze. It was a cousin, kind but aimless, her voice a tour of sympathy without a destination. Noah kept the call short. When he hung up, the girls resumed chewing like actors who had forgotten their line and just found it. He felt the exhaustion of a man carrying furniture alone. He was not angry at Lily yet. Anger required aim. He was standing in fog, and fog resists arrows. He tucked them in. He left the hall light on. He sat at the edge of his bed and did the math again. If she needed help, she could ask. If she needed space, she could say. If she needed to leave, she could close the door behind her with words. Instead, he was left with a silence multiplying questions faster than he could answer them. He looked at the empty side of the bed and understood something painful. Absence is not neutral. It has weight. It rolls across a house like weather. It teaches children to hold their breath. It makes a father choose which truth to postpone. He set his phone face down on the nightstand, not because he did not want to see, but because he wanted to sleep without watching hope light the room and then go dark. Tomorrow he would call once more. Tomorrow he would tell the same patient story to the same patient faces and pretend it was enough. The cruelty, he realized, was not what he knew. It was what he was forced to imagine. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Noah was bent over the dining table helping Sadie with a history project. The officer's voice on the other end was measured, clinical, stripped of pity. "Your wife is safe, but there is more you need to know." The words that followed turned the world into shrapnel. Lily had been having an affair for years, at least 2, maybe longer. The man she had tied herself to in secret, Marcus Hale, was dead. A heart attack. Collapsed without warning. That was why she had vanished. Not danger, not trauma, but grief for another man. Noah froze, the phone pressed to his ear while Sadie tugged at his sleeve, asking if she could use glitter on the poster board. He managed a nod, his throat burning with the taste of iron. When he hung up, the house looked unchanged, yet everything inside it now felt like evidence. He replayed mornings when Lily brewed his coffee, the brush of her hand across his shoulder before work. He replayed small jokes whispered in the dark after the girls had gone to bed. Once they had been tokens of intimacy. Now they looked like camouflage, gestures hiding a devotion that had wandered elsewhere. It struck him with brutal clarity. Betrayal is not always slammed doors or explosive fights. Sometimes it is a slow rot beneath beams, eating the house from the inside until one day the walls fall. That night Noah did not sleep. He stood before the mantel, staring at the framed photograph of their wedding day. Lily's smile, once radiant, now mocked him. He asked the glass a question it could not answer. Was any of it real? Upstairs, his daughters slept, innocent, for a little longer. He promised himself he would not tell them. He would not detonate their childhood with a truth even he could barely survive. By morning, grief and rage began to trade shifts inside him. At breakfast, he buttered toast, cut fruit, poured juice. His hands worked like a machine while his mind replayed the image of Marcus, an invisible rival who had stolen years from his marriage, now lying cold in the ground. The absurdity twisted like a knife. The man she betrayed him with was gone, and yet the marriage remained ruined beyond repair. There would be no confrontation, no chance to shout, "Choose him or choose me." The choice had already been made in silence. In odd moments, Noah imagined Marcus as a ghost seated at their table, sipping coffee across from Lily while she smiled at Noah with practiced ease. The thought sickened him, but it would not leave. Even the hum of the refrigerator began to sound like mocking laughter. When the girls asked again if their mother was coming home soon, Noah gave them the only words he could manage. "She just needs time." He wanted to believe it, but each syllable cut deeper. He was not buying her time. He was paying for her double life with his sanity. That evening, after tucking the girls into bed, he sat in the dark living room and tried to breathe. Rage rose first, urging him to smash the picture frames, to call her parents and scream, to drive 3 hours and demand answers no one wanted to say aloud. But grief answered back, heavy and relentless, whispering that his life as he knew it was already gone. Rage promised fire. Grief promised drowning. Neither offered survival. And so he stayed there, caught between two enemies in the quiet of his own home, a ghost among the people who still needed him alive. The weeks that followed were not weeks at all, but debris scattered after an explosion, fragments of life that cut deeper each day. Noah woke to alarms that weren't ringing. His body jolted awake at 2 a.m., then 3 a.m., then 4:15, his pulse drumming like a warning he could not silence. Sleep became a stranger. When it came, it lasted minutes before rage or grief yanked him back into the dark. He lived on fumes, a man trying to steer his daughters' lives with hands that trembled too much to hold steady. Insomnia left him with hours he did not want. He replayed not only the betrayal but the hollow years leading up to it, moments he had dismissed as fatigue, as routine. The sighs Lily exhaled at the dinner table, the way she stared at the TV without laughter. The nights she rolled away and said she was exhausted. He had told himself marriage was made of seasons, that this was just one of them. Now those memories cut like shrapnel, proof he had been living inside the blast radius without realizing it. By daylight, he forced functionality. He scheduled consultations with 2 divorce attorneys. Both spoke calmly, offered strategies, custody options, financial breakdowns. He listened, nodded, wrote notes, then walked away without signing anything. Putting ink to paper felt like pronouncing a death he had not buried. At night, he found their pamphlets folded in his jacket pocket, their sterile language like a foreign code he could not translate. He reached for therapy, hoping for a lifeline. The receptionist's voice was kind, but the wait list was long, months, not weeks. He signed his name anyway, clinging to the promise of future relief like a man charting a star he might never reach. Until then, he invented his own therapy. A notebook, words jagged across the page, anger bleeding into despair, then swinging back again. Some nights the pen pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. Other nights he wrote only her name until it blurred into strangers' letters. The girls noticed, of course. Children always do. They saw the vacant stares, the sudden bursts of irritation, raised voices over unwashed dishes, sharp sighs at homework questions. They saw the smile he forced, thin as glass, and how quickly it cracked. They adapted, each in their own way. Ava watched him like a hawk. Brooke avoided him, headphones a shield. Sadie clung tighter at bedtime as if her weight could anchor him. One evening, Brooke asked if everything was okay. He nodded too quickly, throat dry, then deflected towards school. She studied him for a long moment before lowering her gaze. That look, wordless, heavy, cut deeper than any question. Betrayal had stolen more than his marriage. It had stolen the stability his daughters once trusted, the foundation they had never thought to question. Their mother's absence was not just her choice, it was a fracture in the world itself. Noah carried the weight of the house, but the crack ran through them all. Still, he could not bring himself to confront Lily directly. The thought of forcing her to admit the truth made his stomach churn. Would hearing her confession bring closure, or would it simply drive the shards deeper? Would healing only come once she confessed, or could it arrive without her words at all? For now, he clung to routine like a raft. Breakfast at 7, school runs at 8, dinner at 6. Laundry on Thursdays. He stacked the days with rituals as if order itself could keep him afloat. Yet every gesture, pouring coffee, folding laundry, setting the table, reminded him of absence. The sweater no longer on the chair. The second mug untouched. The laughter gone. He carried on, a man stitched together by duty, haunted by fragments of love turned to shrapnel, each piece reminding him of the woman who had been his wife, and the silence she left in her place. Grief had left Noah hollow, but rage gave him a task. If Lily would not look him in the eye and tell the truth, then he would uncover it himself. One night after the girls were asleep and the house was wrapped in silence, he opened the filing cabinet where bills and bank statements lay in neat, forgotten stacks. He spread them across the dining table beneath the harsh glow of the pendant light. Numbers blurred into patterns. Lines became maps. The first shock came quickly. Withdrawals in cash, always in even amounts, always before weekends when she claimed to be shopping for the girls. He traced them against the calendar on the wall, marking dates with a pen until the paper sprouted veins of ink. Next, he opened their shared phone records, calls at odd hours, numbers listed under vague names or none at all. Again and again, one number appeared, burned into the log like a watermark he could not unsee. Then came the receipts, tucked into corners of her purse and glove compartment, some slipped into drawers without thought. Hotel chains 2 towns away, dinners for 2 in places he had never stepped. Room service charges that mocked him with precision, 2 omelets, 1 bottle of wine, each scrap of paper cut deeper, truth hiding in plain sight, waiting for him to be desperate enough to look. Every excuse replayed with new clarity. The traffic delay that stretched an extra hour. The office crisis that kept her late 3 nights in a row. The Saturday errands that ended with nothing bought, her voice claiming the store was out of stock. Once she said her card had been declined and she had to sort it out. He had nodded, too tired to press. Now each memory slotted perfectly into the puzzle of deceit. It was a cruelty that staggered him. The same woman who had once held his hand in a delivery room, whispering encouragement as their daughter entered the world, was the one listed on a receipt for champagne in a hotel bed he had never touched. She had smiled through graduations, anniversaries, even hospital visits, her hand steady in his while carving a secret life beneath the same roof. Noah bought a corkboard and string, things he had seen in crime dramas as though order might dull the sting. He pinned receipts, phone logs, notes, and drew lines between them. Slowly, the invisible life of his wife took shape on the board. A secret timeline, a ledger of lies. It looked absurd and undeniable at once. With each discovery, his rage sharpened, but alongside it came grim determination. This investigation was not for revenge. It was survival. He needed to know the world he had actually lived in, not the dream he had been sold. Truth, jagged and cruel, was the only weapon he had left in a war he had never chosen. Yet doubt crept in during quiet moments. Would the truth ever be enough? Even if Lily sat across from him and accounted for every lie, could betrayal ever be explained enough to heal? Did knowing the dates and hotels change the fact that she had chosen someone else over and over while he had chosen her? Still, he could not stop. Each clue was both a wound and a compulsion. He imagined the confrontation, spreading receipts and records across the table, demanding she account for every absence. In his mind, she would either crumble or sneer. Neither fantasy offered peace, but at least the lies would be cataloged. At least the story of his life would be documented in black and white, even if the heart never accepted it. So night after night, when the girls were asleep, Noah sat under the pendant light, sifting through fragments of deceit. His home had become an archive of betrayal, and he was both the archivist and the prisoner, documenting every wound because silence had left them unseen. The knock came on a Sunday afternoon, the hour once reserved for family dinners and laughter. Noah opened the door to find Margaret and Daniel Reed standing on the porch, hands folded, expressions strained between courtesy and shame. They looked older than before, as though scandal had carved fresh lines into their faces. They entered with the politeness of people stepping into hostile ground. Margaret carried a tin of cookies tied with ribbon, as if sugar could mend walls shattered by deceit. Daniel's handshake lingered, his eyes slipping away. They settled into the living room, a place that once carried Lily's chatter and the girls' voices, now waited like a courtroom. Conversation began softly, safe topics, the girls, the weather, but soon Margaret leaned forward, hands clasped tight. "Noah," she began, voice trembling against the words she feared. "She's made mistakes, we know that, but forgiveness is what keeps families whole. Think of the girls. They need their mother." Daniel added weight to her plea. 17 years of marriage isn't something to throw away overnight. Lily is ashamed. She's broken. She wants to come home. Noah listened, jaw tight, teeth grinding behind a mask of civility. Their words landed like testimony rehearsed for court. They weren't speaking as parents seeking truth. They were advocates defending their daughter's name. But shame showed in the pauses. Margaret's eyes fell to the carpet whenever she spoke of Lily's absences. Daniel rubbed the chair arm too often, his throat clearing like he could scrape away what was unsaid. Perhaps they had known for years. Perhaps they had covered for her excuses about errands, visits stretched longer than family required. He let them finish, then straightened in his chair. His voice was steady, unyielding. "If Lily wants to come back, there are conditions. She sits down with me and confesses everything, no evasions. And then she faces the girls. She apologizes to them directly and answers their questions. If she cannot do that, she does not come back." The words struck the room like a gavel. Margaret's eyes widened. Daniel shifted forward, ready to protest, but both fell silent when they saw Noah's resolve. For the first time, they seemed to recognize he was no longer the accommodating son-in-law who once deferred to harmony. Margaret tried again, her voice soft with pleading. "But Noah, the children, do you really think it's best for them to hear?" "Yes," he cut in, sharp but calm. "Because they already know something is broken. They deserve honesty, not whispers. If Lily can't face them, she hasn't earned the right to call herself their mother." Silence thickened, heavy and final. His in-laws exchanged looks, their polite masks cracking. In that silence, Noah saw their desperation. They weren't fighting for his marriage. They were fighting to shield themselves from humiliation. They wanted him to carry the shame so they would not have to. But he would not. That burden was theirs. When the visit ended, Margaret left the tin of cookies on the table, forgotten. Daniel shook his hand again, weaker this time, no conviction in his grip. As the door closed behind them, Noah felt no triumph, only clarity. The next chapter of his life would not be written by persuasion or family fear. It would be written by his choice to reclaim control of a shattered home. It happened on a Friday evening, just as the girls were finishing dinner. Headlights swept across the living room window, pausing in the driveway. Noah's chest tightened before he even looked. He knew. Lily was back. The front door opened with the quiet authority of someone who still believed she belonged. She stepped inside carrying a single suitcase, her shoulders squared but her eyes flickering with nerves. The girls froze at the table, forks suspended in midair, waiting to see if the air itself would break. Noah rose slowly, heartbeat so loud he thought they might hear it. He met her in the entryway, voice low but steady. "If you're coming back, there are terms." Her lips parted, surprise flashing. She tried to move past him, but he stood firm, his body a barrier. "Noah, please," she whispered. "The girls, let me see them." "You'll see them," he said, "but not until you've faced me first. No evasions, no omissions. You tell me everything, and then you tell them all of it. Her hand tightened on the suitcase handle. I can't just— You can, he interrupted, sharper now. You chose lies for 4 years. If you want to walk back into this house, you choose truth tonight. That's the only way. The silence that followed was excruciating. Pleads came in fragments. It's complicated, not in front of the kids. I just need time. Each word was a sidestep, a tactic he recognized. She was still circling the fire she had set. The girls hovered in the doorway, sensing the stakes without knowing the details. Ava's jaw clenched. Brooke's eyes watered. Sadie gripped the banister as if it might hold her steady. Their mother's return, the hope they had whispered, had turned instantly into Judgment Day. They looked from Noah to Lily, watching like jurors at a trial that would decide their future. Inside Noah, grief pressed against rage, but something steadier rose. Resolve. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. What he needed was truth. Without it, every gesture would rot like fruit left too long in the sun. Lily's voice cracked. Do you really want the girls to hear everything, every mistake I made? Yes, Noah said, unwavering. Because they already know enough to guess, and guessing is worse than knowing. You owe them honesty, and you owe me closure. Her shoulders sagged. For a moment he thought she might agree, but then her eyes hardened. Her mouth clamped shut. She set the suitcase down by the door, but did not step farther inside. Legally, he knew he could not bar her from entering. But emotionally, he drew a line she could not cross without truth. He braced himself for what that meant, that she might walk away again, that she might never meet the standard he demanded. The girls' silence was deafening. They understood something irreversible was unfolding, that their father's demand was not cruelty, but the only anchor left to hold the house together. Noah held her gaze, steady as stone. If you can't face us with the truth, then this isn't your home anymore. You don't get to stand in both worlds, not here, not with them. For a long moment, Lily said nothing. She only stared at the suitcase as if it were a verdict she hadn't expected. And in that silence, Noah understood the cost of his resolve. He wasn't fighting for her to stay. He was fighting for his daughters to grow up in a house that did not worship lies. He was fighting for his own right to live without shadows. The standoff stretched on, unbearable, and still he did not yield. Lily crossed the threshold late on a Sunday evening, when the house had quieted after dinner. The suitcase she had left by the door now rolled behind her, its wheels whispering across the hardwood like a verdict no one wanted to hear. She moved into the kitchen without asking permission, setting the bag against the wall as if claiming her place by muscle memory alone. The kitchen light glared down on them, exposing every crease in her face, every line in his. Noah stood at the counter, arms folded, his body coiled with resolve. Are you ready to tell me the truth? He asked. Her response was not confession, but fog. It's complicated. I wasn't myself. I can't explain right now. Each phrase drifted like smoke, clouding instead of clearing. She avoided his eyes, staring at the refrigerator, the window, anywhere but him. Noah pressed harder, voice sharp with control. You owe me answers, Lily. You owe them answers. He jerked his finger toward the staircase where the girls lingered unseen, holding their breath. But Lily gave nothing, only a shrug, a half-formed apology swallowed before it could take shape. Her silence became a wall higher than any truth could scale. It was Ava who shattered it. She had crept down the stairs, listening, piecing fragments together until fury ignited. Stop lying, she screamed, her voice cutting through the kitchen like glass. We all know what you did. Just admit it. The words cracked the air open. Ava's face burned red, her fists balled at her sides. Brooke and Sadie hovered behind her, eyes wide, their bodies frozen between fear and fury. Lily reached toward them, but Ava pulled back as if her mother's touch were fire. You don't get to come back and pretend nothing happened, she spat before storming upstairs. The slam of her door echoed like a gavel ending court. The confrontation forced Noah's hand. He looked at Lily, this woman who once laughed beside him in cars, who whispered private jokes in crowded rooms and felt only void. His voice came steady, louder than he expected. I want a divorce. The word landed heavy, reverberating through the walls. Brooke gasped softly. Sadie buried her face in the banister. Lily froze. Her face shifted from shock to something worse, blankness. No plea, no denial, no explanation. just vacancy, as though her spirit had left long before this night. Noah realized then that the woman he had loved half his life no longer stood before him. What remained was someone unwilling or unable to face the wreckage she had made. The silence between them screamed louder than any fight could. It was not reconciliation, not even conflict. It was the death of a marriage disguised as endurance. He turned away first because there was nothing left to see. The girls retreated to their rooms, the house fracturing into separate silences. Lily disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps fading until a door clicked shut. That night, Noah sat in the dark, listening. Through the thin walls came muffled sobs, her grief spilling at last. Once the sound of her crying would have pulled him to her side. He would have held her whispered comfort, offered his chest as shelter. Now he stayed where he was. The instinct had calcified into something unrecognizable. His grief no longer bent toward her. It hardened into resolve. He was done waiting for words that would never come. Done asking for truth she would not give. The marriage had already ended. It only waited to be buried. The divorce papers were not signed yet, but the decision lingered in the air like weather everyone could feel. Life shifted into a fragile arrangement, an awkward truce no one named out loud. Lily stayed with her sister on weekends, returning midweek to a house that no longer welcomed her. She orbited the family like a reluctant satellite, close enough to observe but never again at the center. Conversations became stripped of intimacy, reduced to transactions. Brooke has practice at 6. The bill is due Friday. I'll pick up Sadie tomorrow. Each exchange sharp-edged, leaving no room for warmth. Even when she said thank you, it sounded like punctuation, not gratitude. The house reflected the division. The living room became neutral ground claimed by whoever entered first. If Noah sat at one end of the couch, Lily sat at the other, her body turned away, scrolling her phone. At dinner, sometimes she joined, sometimes she didn't, the empty chair beside her a constant reminder. At night, her footsteps retreating upstairs echoed louder than any argument. Noah practiced restraint with the precision of survival. His body begged to unleash fury, to demand answers, to spit questions that burned his throat. Why him? Why for so long? Why lie every day? But he swallowed them, refusing to let his daughters see rage become the language of their home. Outwardly, he modeled calm. Inside, he was a storm pacing its cage. The girls adapted, each in their own way. Sadie clung to his hand whenever they walked, afraid he too might vanish. Brooke withdrew into schoolwork and headphones, her face tilted toward a screen, her body avoiding the fracture. Ava simmered openly, her anger aflame. She snapped at her mother, rolled her eyes at attempts at small talk, once muttering, "You don't belong here," loud enough for everyone to hear. Even silence taught lessons. It showed them what betrayal looked like, not through shouting, but through the constant absence of trust. Noah feared what they were learning, that love was fragile, that lies hollow a home, that silence itself can wound. So he vowed to teach another lesson: composure, dignity, boundaries. Still, every day felt like theater on ruins. He smiled at breakfast, reminded them about homework, laughed at their stories. But behind the performance, his chest carried jagged glass. Every task, folding laundry, setting the table, driving carpool, was shadowed by her orbit. One evening they all landed in the living room at once. Lily scrolling her phone, the girls sprawled on the rug with homework, Noah perched in the armchair. No one spoke. The silence grew so dense that even the ticking clock felt intrusive. It struck him then this was no longer a family, but a ceasefire, a house of 4 and a ghost. The truce held, but barely. It was not peace. It was pause, and Noah knew it could not last. One day, silence would no longer be enough to contain the storm. It happened on a Wednesday evening, long after dinner dishes were cleared and the girls had retreated upstairs. The house was steeped in its native silence, heavy, stretched, unnatural. Noah sat at the end of the table, flipping through bills more for distraction than duty. Lily entered quietly and lowered herself into the chair opposite. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her hands began to tremble. Her face crumpled, the mask she had worn for weeks breaking apart. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." The words stunned him. For months he had demanded truth, pleaded for answers, but what she offered now was not truth, only apology. Still, the sound rattled him. He had imagined her weeping 1,000 times, but the reality unsettled him. It brought no satisfaction. It cracked something inside. He wanted to tell her too late. He wanted to turn away. Instead, his voice rose, low at first, then a torrent. Years of suspicion, confusion, betrayal poured out. He accused her of wasting his loyalty, of erasing 17 years with selfish choices. He reminded her of every holiday spoiled by absence, every night she lied about errands, every kiss given with another man's shadow already present. The words tumbled raw, unfiltered. He shouted until his throat burned, until his vision blurred, until his own tears spilled. For the first time since Discovery Day, he was not silent, not composed, not restrained. He was simply broken, and he let her see it. When his voice finally cracked into exhaustion, the kitchen was filled only with the sound of two people weeping. Lily covered her face, repeating "I'm sorry" as if repetition could erase the ledger of lies. Noah sat hunched, palms pressed flat against the table as if bracing himself against collapse. Shame crept in quickly. He had promised himself he would not lose control, not in front of her, not within earshot of the girls. He wanted to model dignity. Instead, he had erupted like a man without anchor. He pressed harder into the wood as if grounding himself could undo the spill. But a quieter realization followed. For once, his pain was not contained in silence. It had been witnessed. His anger, his grief, his despair, he had laid them bare, and Lily had sat through it, unable to dismiss or deflect. Her tears did not absolve her. They did not erase betrayal, but they proved something else. She carried guilt. She was unraveling too. The sight unsettled him. It meant the story was not as simple as indifference. She had not shrugged off their years without consequence. She was collapsing too, even if too late. That did not change reality. They were broken beyond repair. But it complicated the picture. As he rose from the table, legs unsteady, Noah realized catharsis was not relief. It left him shaking, unsure whether he was stronger for speaking or weaker for losing control. Healing would not come from apologies, no matter how many. It would come only from his ability to steady himself again. Still, the cracks in her mask lingered in his mind. They revealed their own truth. The woman who betrayed him was not immune to consequence. She was haunted too, and that knowledge, strange and bitter, was both comfort and curse. It was past midnight when Noah heard the knock on his bedroom door. Light, hesitant but persistent. He opened it to find Lily standing there, her eyes swollen, her voice nearly gone from hours of muffled crying. "Can we talk?" she asked. He wanted to shut the door. He wanted to tell her words were useless now, but something, duty, exhaustion, or the thin hope of clarity, motioned her toward the garage. They sat in his parked car, engine off, the air heavy with oil and cold concrete. The space felt like a confessional booth, dim and private, the only walls thick enough to contain what was about to be said. For a long time, she said nothing. Her fingers twisted in her lap. Then slowly, haltingly, she began. "It started with my sister. She introduced me to him, Marcus Hale, older, confident, successful. At first it was nothing, jokes, compliments, then texts, just small things, but it made me feel alive again." Noah stared at the dashboard, jaw clenched. "Alive, you had a husband, you had 3 daughters." Her voice cracked. "I know, but he noticed me. He made me feel seen in ways I hadn't felt in years. It was intoxicating, coffee at first, then lunches, then hotels." She unspooled the timeline like thread hidden in her chest, fake work trips. Shopping that stretched into hours, traffic jams invented from nothing, each excuse layered until deceit became her second language. When lockdown came, Noah thought the family had grown closer. Lily cooking more, movie nights, board games, long conversations. He remembered feeling grateful. But in the car, she confessed. "We paused for a while, but as soon as restrictions lifted, he called. And I went back." Noah's hands gripped the steering wheel, though the car never started. "So every time you told me you were tired, every time you said you needed space." She nodded quickly, tears brimming. "I was lying. I thought I could stop. I told myself each time would be the last, but he'd message and I'd give in. It was a cycle I never broke." Her words painted images Noah wished he could burn, Marcus waiting in hotel bars, Lily slipping off her ring, rehearsing excuses like lines in a play. She described the thrill of being desired, the fantasy of escape, the guilty high before the inevitable crash. Noah interrupted often, voice sharp. Where? When? How many times? He demanded specifics, forcing her to pin deceit to dates and places. She answered in fragments, steady but halting, as if rehearsed in silence for years. Hours passed. The garage air grew colder. Their breath fogged faintly in the dark. She kept talking and he kept listening, though every word cut him open again. His mind flickered back to mornings she kissed his cheek, nights she claimed late work, weekends she ran errands. Each memory rearranged itself into evidence, a crime scene he had been too blind to see. By dawn, Noah felt emptied and overwhelmed. He had demanded this confession, clawed for it, insisted on it as the condition of her return, and now he had it. But instead of healing, it scorched. Truth did not soothe. It widened wounds, proved the depth of betrayal and persistence of her choices. Lily's voice cracked again. I wish I could undo it. Noah turned toward her, face carved with exhaustion. You can't, and knowing everything doesn't make it better. It just shows me how much you chose him over us. Again and again. The words settled like ash. Silence followed, heavy and permanent. In that moment, Noah realized the truth was not the bomb he imagined. Truth burned, and now there was no going back. They sat in the garage until the first light of dawn filtered through the small window above the workbench. Noah felt hollow, stripped raw by the details Lily had spilled like broken glass. He thought the worst was behind him. He thought he had heard the deepest cruelty. He was wrong. Her voice was fragile, but the words carried more weight than any confession before. I wasn't unhappy with you, she said. You were a good husband, a good father. I was bored. The word clanged in Noah's skull like iron struck with a hammer. Bored, not unloved, not abused, not abandoned, just restless, just bored. 17 years of marriage and 3 daughters, reduced to background noise behind her craving for novelty. He stared at her, waiting for correction, for explanation to soften the blow. But none came. She repeated it, slower this time, as though wanting him to understand. Life with Marcus wasn't better. It was just different. It broke the routine. Our life, it felt predictable, too predictable. Noah laughed, a sound jagged and bitter. Bored, he repeated, lips curling into a smile with no warmth. That's your reason, that's what you risked everything for, boredom? Lily flinched, but she didn't retract. Her shoulders sagged as she whispered, I needed something to feel alive. Anger ripped through him hotter than before. Alive, we built a family. We raised 3 girls. We made a life. That was being alive. But to you, it wasn't enough. It was noise, routine, a cage, and for that, you burned everything down. His fist slammed against the steering wheel. The sound reverberated through the car. He didn't care if the whole world heard. Boredom is not a reason, he spat. It's an insult. It reduces every sacrifice, every night I stayed up when the kids were sick, every paycheck I earned, every promise I kept, to nothing. Just background noise while you chased thrills. Tears streamed down her face, but they brought him no relief. She had chosen to speak the word. She had chosen to strip their marriage down to a shallow excuse. It wasn't passion that pulled her away, or tragedy, or desperation. It was monotony. A word as bland as paint had destroyed decades. In that instant, Noah felt the final severing. The fragile thread of hope for a redeemable reason snapped. Whatever love had once existed drowned beneath the shallow tide of her impulses. He sat back, breath ragged, staring at her as though she were a stranger. And she was. The woman he had married had not simply betrayed him. She had dismissed him, dismissed them, all of it. The cruelest revelation was not that she cheated. It was that she did it for nothing, for novelty, for the thrill of breaking patterns, for the intoxication of feeling wanted outside the home they built together. Noah laughed again, quieter now, hollow. You threw everything away because you were bored. That's all I needed to know. She reached for his arm, but he pulled back. Don't, he warned. Don't touch me, because now I understand. There's no saving this, not now, not ever. The garage sank into silence again, but it was no longer temporary. This silence was heavy, final. A silence that marked the death of love, the burial of trust, the end of any illusion their marriage could be salvaged. And Noah knew with an ache sharp as steel that this was the moment he was finally free. The morning after Lily's final confession, Noah woke with a decision already fixed inside him. For weeks he had turned over questions like stones. What now, what if, what next? But boredom, her last explanation, had shattered hesitation. There was nothing left to salvage. The marriage was over. Now it needed to be ended in fact as well as feeling. He called the attorney he had once consulted, the calm voice who had slid pamphlets across a desk weeks earlier. This time, Noah showed up with a folder under his arm. Bank statements, phone records, receipts. His ledger of lies transformed into evidence. Filing the paperwork was sterile, almost clinical. Names, dates, signatures, notarized pages, the language of dissolution. For Noah, each signature was ground reclaimed, another brick in the wall he was building between himself and the chaos Lily had sown. The attorney explained the 90-day waiting period, the mandatory bridge before the decree. 90 days sounded long, a gauntlet of endurance, but it also sounded like structure. A countdown toward freedom, telling the girls was the hardest part. He gathered them at the kitchen table one evening, plates still warm. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he explained. Your mother and I are divorcing. That means we won't live together as husband and wife anymore, but we are both still your parents. That will never change. Sadie cried immediately. Brooke stared down at her plate. Ava glared at the wall with teenage fury. Noah pulled them close, repeating over and over, "This is not your fault. You are loved. You will always be loved." Lily resisted, of course. She wept, begged, tried to argue. She claimed they could fix it, that the girls deserved a united home. But every plea rang hollow against the evidence already laid bare. Receipts, records, her own admissions. She yielded eventually, not with grace but with resignation, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of ruin. In the days that followed, Noah found strange steadiness in paperwork. Divorce filings, custody schedules, asset divisions. Words like equitable distribution and custodial rights became a new language, cold but reliable. Where love had failed him with its chaos, structure sustained him. Contracts, signatures, timelines, things that could not be undone by tears or nostalgia. Paper became his shield. He reclaimed other pieces of control. A new bank account in his own name. Bills organized into labeled folders. A weekly schedule written with the girls. Who would cook, who would set the table, what nights were for homework, what nights for games. They were small anchors, but they were his. There was no joy in it, at least not yet, but there was comfort. Comfort in order, comfort in proof that even on ruins a framework could be built. One evening he sat alone at the dining table with a stack of documents. He read each page carefully, his pen hovering before every signature. Strange, surreal to see his marriage reduced to numbered sections and sterile paragraphs. But instead of despair, he felt relief. The papers did not lie. They did not twist. They told the truth, even if cold. When he signed his name, the ink bled into paper with quiet finality. And for the first time in months, Noah exhaled without fear that the air itself would betray him. On Saturday morning, Noah pulled the griddle from the cabinet and announced pancakes like a coach calling a play. He whisked batter in the blue bowl Lily once favored, then added cinnamon because Sadie had said it made the kitchen smell like Christmas. The first pancake was pale, the second better, the third just right. By the time the girls drifted in, the house carried warmth instead of grief. They ate cross-legged at the table, syrup dripping, conversation light at first, then warmer. Someone laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the house answered back with something other than silence. Noah decided this would be ritual. Saturdays belonged to pancakes. He built more anchors as the week unfolded, driving to practice with playlists the girls curated, sitting through homework at the dining table, present without hovering, listening at dinner with his phone face down, asking follow-ups that didn't turn into lectures. When silence threatened, he filled it with stories, old ones about their childhood that made them roll their eyes but smile anyway. Ava was the hardest to reach. Anger fit her like armor, trust did not. In the car, she gave one-word answers, staring out the window. Noah let the quiet be, then offered the only promise he knew he could keep. "I won't lie to you." He repeated it days later, then again after a missed pickup earned her sharp words. Over time, the promise landed. One afternoon, she talked for 15 minutes straight about a group project. When she finished, she glanced at him, testing. He was listening. Something in her face softened. Brooke came differently late at night, tapping on his door, whispering, "Are we going to have to move?" Noah sat her on the bed and answered carefully. They would stay through the school year, details were being worked out, she could always ask again. She nodded, then asked the deeper question. "Did I do something wrong?" His answer was faster this time. "No, never." She cried without sound, and he stayed until she slept, the way he had when she was little. Sadie became his shadow. She lingered in doorways, curled against his side during movies, reached for his hand on sidewalks. At bedtime, she asked for 2 stories instead of one, and he said yes every time. Often she wanted the same one, how she learned to ride a bike, how she scraped both knees but kept going. He told it exactly, then added a new line. "You were brave and you didn't even know it yet." She squeezed his arm like that line was a blanket. Noah practiced apologies when he slipped. A snap over homework, a forgotten permission slip. "That wasn't fair, try me again." "That was my mistake." The girls saw him repair breaks in real time, learning that dignity wasn't perfection but honesty. Boundaries with Lily stayed firm. Texts were logistics only, practices, dentist appointments, pickups. If she strayed toward emotion, he redirected, "Let's keep this about the girls." He refused to let bitterness set the tone. When the girls asked about their mother, he answered what was age-appropriate, then turned back to what was theirs to control: sleep, school, kindness. They were children, he would be the adult. Small victories stitched their days, replacing the wobbly kitchen chair, clearing the hall closet. Starting a firsts jar on the counter, Ava laughed at breakfast, Brooke aced her quiz. Sadie slept through the night. The jar filled faster than he expected. He started running again at dawn. The first morning left him winded, the second steadier. By the third, the rhythm of shoes on pavement steadied him. He didn't chase speed, he chased breath, proof that forward was possible. Evenings brought shared dinners. One girl chopped, one stirred, one set the table fancy. They argued over playlists, laughed over half-burnt dishes, rated meals out of 10. A wall list grew on the fridge, dishes to repeat, disasters not to. Laughter didn't cure, but it proved survival. The house was not whole. Too much space gaped where trust had lived. Yet warmth returned in pockets. Private jokes resurfaced. Nights ended with walks, laundry folding contests, invented stories about the neighbor's cat. On Sundays, Noah wrote the week's schedule on the whiteboard, practices, tests, dinners. At the top, he always wrote, "You are loved. This is not your fault." The girls rolled their eyes, but left it. Sometimes you need to see the words to believe them again. He realized then, revenge or reconciliation were not the measure. What mattered was the model. He wanted his daughters to know heartbreak could be survived with dignity, that boundaries weren't walls but doors you chose when ready, that strength could be quiet and still count. One night, after homework and dishes and a movie that made them all cry in the good way, Sadie fell asleep on his shoulder. Ava leaned back, eyes closed but listening to the credits song. Brooke whispered, "We've got this," as she snapped a photo of the whiteboard. Noah sat still, memorizing the weight of the moment, grateful for joy that didn't need fireworks. Lily's absence remained a fact. The paperwork a road ahead, but fatherhood remained too, clearer, sharper, steadier. The role she shattered was not the one that defined him now. The one she could not touch did. His girls were the anchor. And for the first time since the dam cracked, Noah felt the boat hold. Divorce moved forward like a train on schedule, paperwork, hearings, signatures pending. Lily oscillated between sorrow and denial, sending late-night texts dressed in costumes, apology, plea, revision. "I wasn't bored, I was lost. It wasn't about you. We can fix this if we try." Noah read each once, then archived them. He refused to let her rewrite betrayal as fate. He refused to star in her edited version of history. Boundaries held. Communication was logistics only. Pickups, appointments, which backpack was at whose house. If talk strayed toward the past, he steered it back. "Let's keep this about the girls." He wrote it so often it became muscle memory, a flick of the wrist like signaling before a lane change. Civility without intimacy. The corkboard in the dining room, the receipts, the red strings, the timeline came down one Sunday. He pulled the pins gently, filled the holes, rolled the string into a nest and dropped it in the trash. Keeping the archive had helped him survive the beginning. Keeping it now would only chain him there. In its place, he hung a blank calendar and wrote across the top, run, breathe, repeat. He started before dawn. The first jog punished him, lungs burning, thighs protesting. By the third morning, something shifted. He counted breaths, 4 in, 4 out, watched streetlights fade as the sky lightened. He wasn't chasing speed. He was practicing presence, proof that forward existed. He reclaimed other rituals. Coffee on the back steps after drop-off. Stretching in the living room while Sadie demonstrated her 9-year-old version of yoga. Folding laundry with Brooke, letting the podcast jingle play because she liked it. Spotting Ava at the gym and correcting only if she asked. Each small act laid track for a life that did not depend on Lily's weather. Triggers still flared, a song from their wedding at the grocery store, a billboard for a hotel, the scent of a hand soap she used to buy. The hits landed, then passed. He let them. Scars remained, but they did not dictate the day. When a bad hour came, he gave it a boundary too. You get 60 minutes, then I'm taking the rest back. Friends noticed the shift. A neighbor at pickup, you look lighter. His sister on FaceTime, are you okay? For the first time in months, his yes wasn't performance, it was inventory, not fixed, not finished, but lighter. Lily tried again with myths people tell when drowning. We drifted, we both made mistakes. Noah declined the edits. I won't participate in a story that isn't true, he said, calm as a recorder. He didn't list receipts anymore. He didn't need to. Refusal was its own truth. Closure wasn't her confession. It was his decision to stop listening. On a Thursday, he signed the custody schedule. He asked questions, took notes, walked out with copies he didn't bother to read in the car. Paper no longer terrified him. It clarified. The future had dates and times that could be followed. At home, he kept the house kind. Not cheerful, honesty mattered, but kind. He praised the girls when they did well, owned mistakes quickly. The word sorry returned to the kitchen, not as manipulation, but maintenance. On a quiet Saturday, he boxed the wedding album. He didn't burn it. He didn't display it. Some artifacts belonged to the past, and honoring them meant leaving them there. Dawn runs became declarations. The first mile said, I exist beyond her choices. The second answered, I exist beyond my pain. By the third, breath settled and the street became less punishment, more promise. The sun climbed and Noah thought, not poetically but practically, I can build a day out of this. He no longer chased a sentence that would explain betrayal. There was none. Closure did not require Lily. Reckoning was his alone. He could forgive what he chose and release what he chose without her participation. One evening, after dinner and homework, he stepped onto the porch with a mug. The sky was the kind of blue that forgets it used to be day. A jogger passed, rhythm steady, and Noah felt the faintest pull to tomorrow. For the first time in months, the future did not feel like a courtroom or a cliff. It felt like a road. The final papers lay on the table, crisp and clinical, their black ink more decisive than any argument ever spoken. Noah signed his name with a hand that no longer trembled. When the pen lifted, something inside him lifted too. The end was not thunderous. It was quiet, like a long-held breath finally released. Lily came to gather her things on a Thursday afternoon. No tears, no dramatic pleas, no bargaining. Just the subdued shuffle of boxes carried out the door, the muted scrape of a suitcase. She offered a faint goodbye to the girls, a whisper too soft to matter, then looked once toward Noah. He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. He felt no collapse, only weary acceptance. She walked out of the house she once called hers, and for the first time, Noah did not feel abandoned. He felt free. He turned back to the room still full of life, the laughter of his daughters upstairs, the scattered backpacks, the socks lost in corners, the half-finished art projects, the smell of dinner warming on the stove. What endured was not absence, it was presence, integrity, fatherhood, the stubborn capacity to love without erasing himself. That night, he sat with the girls at the table and spoke clearly. "This house isn't broken," he told them. "It's different, but it's ours, and we're going to be okay." Ava studied him as though testing his words for cracks. Brooke leaned her head against his arm. Sadie slipped her hand into his. In that moment, he knew the truth. Lily had destroyed his marriage, but she could not erase his family. So Noah began building forward, not backward. Pancakes on Saturday, runs at dawn, whiteboard schedules that always ended with, "You are loved." He spoke of the past when the girls asked, but he no longer lived there. The years with Lily remained part of his story, but they no longer defined his map. They were history, not destiny. Weeks later, Noah drove to the city overlook just before sunset. The sky burned gold at the edges, the horizon wide and waiting. He stood at the railing, breathing deep, the air sharp in his lungs. The weight of loss still pressed against him, but alongside it came something lighter, like the first stretch after long confinement. He did not choose betrayal. He did not choose years of lies, but he chose what came next. He chose presence over absence, honesty over pretense, love without illusion. Most of all, he chose himself, not in bitterness, but in reclamation. As the sun sank and the city lights flickered awake, Noah whispered into the open air, "This isn't the end of a marriage. It's the beginning of a life reclaimed." And for the first time in years, the words felt not like survival, but like freedom. And so this is how the story ends. Lily's betrayal lasted 4 years, hidden behind excuses and lies. But in the end, Noah chose not to be defined by betrayal. He chose himself, and he chose to rebuild for the sake of his daughters. It's a painful reminder. Betrayal always has a cost, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. What would you do if you were in Noah's place? Could you ever forgive, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here on Cheating Stories 7 for more powerful, unforgettable journeys. Until next time, thank you for watching.